is Health Digest. I'm Dr. Mercy Korir, and now we focus on our soldiers on the front lines. The night before Dr. Mercy Mwangangi was appointed as the Chief Administrative Secretary for Health, she was weighing her options on 3 lucrative job offers. Little did she know that her youthfulness and years of experience had earned her a seat at the table, a seat where her soft-spoken nature would be put to test by a global pandemic. This is the story of Dr. Mercy Mwangangi, a young doctor with a big heart for public service.
I went to Pangani Girls High School a few years ago, and that's where I did my high school learning. And thereafter, graduated from Form 4 and joined medical school. I went to the University of Nairobi, class of 2009. And after going through medicine, perhaps that's where I'd say my career in medicine started, as an intern in Machakos Level 5, where we served as about just 5 or 6 interns serving the whole hospital. And so it was a grueling year of internship. I'm sure you remember how internship was, working close to 48-hour shifts. And basically, I think the foundation of building you as a doctor, which we got a really good experience, very busy workloads in Machakos Level 5. And thereafter, I practiced for 1 more year. And in true fashion at the time, prior to devolution, I was posted from Machakos to Tharaka Nithi, Meru South District. And I was moved from clinical practice to public health. And perhaps that's where the path in my road diverted from clinical practice. So in Meru South, at the age of 23, I was put up as the District Medical Officer of Health, serving a large number of health facilities, about 30 in number, and sitting, in the district committees with the district commissioners and, the commandants then who, were decades older than me at that time. So thereafter, about 3 years after practice there in the public health space, I felt it was necessary to expand my knowledge base, and so I applied for several scholarships, and luckily got shortlisted for 2. One was here, was to be undertaken within the country, and the other was to be undertaken in Australia. And I remember, debating, if I should continue with a scholarship here in Kenya or go to Australia. But my parents felt it was important to expand my base. I do remember them saying, it's always very important, to travel far and wide and to learn, because the world is such a big teacher and experience is always best. Together with that scholarship, I also applied for a leadership scholarship. And that was a very challenging task that required us to really present ourselves, as future potential leaders and go through a mentorship program. And so out of 10,000 applicants in Africa, I was amongst the 8 who got shortlisted in Africa, and I undertook a leadership program under the Australian Alumni Program. While there, in classes with very intelligent people from across the world, for your voice to be heard, you literally do have to speak out loud, or else you'll just drown in the masses. And so it was an experience. And in Adelaide, I was actually a team leader in our class, very vocal. I was the convener in our class. In terms of our training, we do always perhaps center around the patient, and our care revolves around the patient. But health economics gave me a rather wider lens of looking at patients and society and realizing that patients are part of a larger population and society. And so there was an appreciation of interventions that perhaps would affect more than just one person. Unlike the individual patient, you're running programs and strategies that would have a mass effect. And I think that was quite a drawing factor for me in health economics. I think the other perhaps drawing factor there would be my love for, should I call it, strategic decision making and ensuring that every penny is accounted for. When in medicine, all your virtues and efforts are geared towards that individual patient. In health economics, sometimes there's an opportunity cost, and decisions have to be made as to whether you'll fund diabetes or you'll fund hypertension. And if you fund diabetes, then it means you're unfunding hypertension. So there's an opportunity cost. And so it's a very different way of thinking about things. But I think both experiences have sort of prepared me for my current position. After around 18 months, on voluntary basis, I received a posting to work in the M&E department in the Ministry of Health. And the team there was able to sort of give me a very good view of, should I say, national health sector issues. You can appreciate working in M&E gives you the opportunity to interact with all the different spheres within the ministry. And while in that interaction, I was able to, naturally be drawn towards the National Hospital Insurance Fund and the work therein. And I was part of the team that was assessing their performance contracts and doing their appraisals. And so 5 months into the ministry, I was promoted to head the health financing division. A very young 29-year-old running a health financing division, and it was interesting trying to translocate the Australian experience with their Medicare program into our program, and that's where I'd say my love affair with NHIF started. And it's been a journey there. We worked on different elements there. We put together the Linda Mama program then it was the free maternity service program. I first met the previous cabinet secretary in Washington during a presentation at the World Bank spring meetings. And it is at this time where the UHC agenda was being rolled out, and she required the support in terms of trying to craft the UHC agenda and in trying to translate the president's dream into an intervention that's actionable. And so together we formed with other team members in the ministry what is known as a UHC delivery team. This was a small team of 5 dedicated officers. And we took on the planning and the brainstorming and the thinking and the stakeholder engagement around the UHC program. And the pilot was then launched about a year ago, a year and a few months ago in Kisumu. And that was quite a happy day for us all because it took a lot of tears, blood and sweat to get that going to that point. And so perhaps it's through that interaction where I then was elevated to a technical advisor for the Ministry of Health under the UNFPA program. And that again gave me a very good experience in understanding the multilateral developmental partners world, and that was instrumental again into where I am. Thereafter, in that role, that was perhaps my last current position before I received the announcement a few months ago that I had been nominated as or appointed as a Chief Administrative Secretary. And it's interesting to say that prior to that nomination, I actually had just received 3 job offers the night before. And the 4th one came, and you'd never say no to the president. And so I took that one. And here we are today dealing with coronavirus.
Did you see that coming?
No. Unlike popular belief, no. I actually did not see that coming. We, through the UHC program, had a lot of continuous engagement with the Office of the President. And so, getting the appointment, I actually, had thought that the idea was to come in and, do a little technical piece of work, perhaps a reiteration of what UHC would look like beyond the pilot exercise. And that's sort of the conversation I'd had the night before the appointment. Never the thought of, sitting perhaps in such an office within government. That was completely a blind side for me. I do remember, in fact, the morning of the announcement, I was actually busy in the office, going through the county intergovernmental participation agreements that were being signed. And I was actually preparing a summary brief report of so far how many counties had signed and what we needed to do to onboard those who had signed, how the work plans would look like. And then my phone started ringing off the hook, and everyone was calling and congratulating me, and it was quite a surreal moment. I thought I was being pranked actually at a point.
What excites you about being a Chief Administrative Secretary?
As an individual, my mother will tell you I'm actually a bit of a thrill seeker, and I work best in high pressure situations and in high pressure landscapes. My best spaces are in spaces where I sort of need to output a certain deliverable in very intense situations.
In a pressure cooker.
In a pressure cooker situation. And so this is familiar ground, this is familiar territory. However, there's now an interesting niche. Up until this point, I've been more or less a technical officer and a technical advisor, very preoccupied with the doing and the thinking around and the planning, and, around all the different interventions. Now I find myself in a space where I have to coordinate that, and I have to ensure that I bring out that talent from different individuals, and that I think is always an interesting experience, especially when you're so used to being, a doer of things. But also I think this space then, for me, proves what we've always known, that the technical components of a situation are always very important, but are merely a factor in the delivery or in the outputs that you get. And so I'm sort of in between a space where I'm having to have technical and political translation going, and I'm a bridge for that in order to be able to have a good output coming out.
What motivated you to shift from clinical practice to non-clinical practice, to stop being a frontline medic, as we may call it?
I actually wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, and perhaps that's a pursuit that I may actually take up, who knows, in the coming years. And I do remember when I got my posting to move into the public health space, I actually debated declining it. And my father is the one who actually pushed me and said, no, you're not going to decline that. You're going to go in and jump in there, and you should never quit. You should never say no. Jump in and go and learn and see. And when I got there, I do remember my first meeting, sitting there with a DHM team, and the team was telling me, so tomorrow we'll be going for outreach services. And I remember wondering, what do they mean outreach services? For me as a doctor, the bedside is the heartbeat. The bedside is the kitchen where you work, it's the office. And so we went for outreach services, and this was a simple nutrition camp where we were distributing folic acid and doing some deworming. And I can just remember seeing throngs and throngs of people, all coming around, the outreach vehicle, and everyone, coming in and presenting so many different complaints and issues that they wanted sorted out. And realizing that had we not done that outreach, then nobody would have reached those people. And so that was just an automatic switch, that perhaps instead of concentrating on that one single bedside patient who comes to you, why instead shouldn't I go to the people and be there with the people and take the services to them? And that was interesting, very satisfying, very, very rewarding, but also very humbling to see the reach that public health can actually have on a population.
Do you ever miss being by the bedside, being at the front line and attending to somebody at the bedside? Do you miss that life?
Definitely. Being a doctor is in my DNA. It's very difficult to divorce a doctor from the bedside. Interestingly, all through the past 11 years, I've received multiple consultations. As you know, when you're a doctor, you're the family doctor. And so it's always difficult to, steer away from that space. A few times I've actually debated, perhaps I should go and do a ward round. I actually miss, should I say, the experience of going from bed to bed to bed to bed and engaging with fellow colleagues and trying to, understand what exactly is wrong with the patient. That I will always miss. I do not think that I've completely rubbed that away. from my career. There will be different spaces, I think, where opportunities will come up, where you can still engage with patients. And interestingly, you've just reminded me, part of my Australian experience, one of the mentors that I had there was a phenomenal woman known as Julie Bishop, who was one of the facilitators for our leadership program. And during that mentorship program, she told us, in your career, you should always have 5 iterations. By the time you die, you should always have almost 5 versions of your career, or 5, should I say, spaces in which you've acted in your career. And so I do remember thinking, and I often reflect on this, started as a general practitioner and jumped into the public health space, worked as a health economist, and now I'm in this interesting 2.5 iteration as a chief administrative secretary. So there's still more ahead. Still have to get to number 5.
Do you have any regrets so far up to where you are now?
I wouldn't say I have any regrets. I primarily would say, as my mother would say, I'm married to my work. And I'm sure you'll be leading on with a question of whether there's an actual human being that I'm married to. But the thing is, I love my work. There's no truer testament as having worked for 18 months for free, doing 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., unpaid, but then completely fulfilled by the work that I was doing. And this has continued on even through coronavirus, despite the grueling hours we're putting in and the very high intense, and sometimes anxiety-filled situations. I still thoroughly enjoy my work, and I wouldn't be doing anything else. Perhaps biggest regret would be the few kilos I've put on while sitting in the office. But this is something that I'd be working on in a few months to come, especially post-corona. I think I've sort of neglected the spaces where I'm able to, pay a little bit more attention to myself as an individual.
Is there anything you are afraid of, either for Kenya or yourself?
The biggest fear, and I've always shared this with my friends, is to be given an opportunity to be in a space where you can effect change and not to do it, and not to utilize all the spaces and all the networks that exist to actually effect change for Kenyans. I feel perhaps, as many people say, and I think this may sound like a cliche, but most people in their lives, by the time they end up on their deathbed, people accumulate different things. People accumulate wealth, people cultivate relationships, and most people fear different things. Some people would fear perhaps losing their wealth. Others fear perhaps disconnecting from the relationships that they've built. For me, I think the biggest tragedy would be on my deathbed and be there while having not utilized all my potential.
You are in a position as a Chief Administrative Secretary, which is mainly politics and a very political environment. Do you have any sights whatsoever on politics?
So it's interesting you should say that, because I think most recently all the villagers and people back home, are probably should I say, brewing the next, should I say, political seat or space for me to be in. I feel in whatever spaces we are and in whatever leadership roles that we may hold, perhaps yourself in the docket that you sit in and where I sit in, there's a responsibility and for us to effect change in the community. And it's very hard to divorce yourself from that space, by virtue of saying that you're in a technical space. Would I be willing to represent people, in different spaces in a purely political seat? I think I haven't ruled that out. However, right now, I think the space that I am in provides me with that opportunity to be able to learn how to translate what the needs of the community are in actionable steps, while still having, that engagement with the political class and trying to have them as collaborators in translating these dreams. The future is wide open. Like I said, 5 iterations of a career, so that's right there on the table.
It could be one of them.
Could be one of them.
What do you think about being a young woman in a mainly male-dominated environment? We find ourselves in situations where you're young and you're just thrown into the deep end.
The very idea of distinguishing or boxing environments by gender perhaps is always the first misstep for us, you know, as a country, as a nation, or as a society. And so far, I've had very good mentors and very good enablers who've made spaces for me available. I must note my Cabinet Secretary, Mutai Kagwe, has been absolutely wonderful in being an able and worthy mentor for me, and has provided me the opportunity to be able to use my talents, both in advising him and in working with him. And so these spaces are there, they're available, and you just require that support around you to be able to shine.
Out of this number, 2 have tested positive for coronavirus disease. 1 in Mombasa.
I'm blessed to have been born into a very supportive family. My mother is a lawyer by profession, and my father is a businessman, and my family is quite supportive of the work that I do. It's interesting to note, while most people would, at my age, 33, be inundated with lots of questions from aunties and grandmothers and fathers and mothers about settling down and having a family. My father is usually my biggest cheerleader. If you asked him right now, he's probably planning for the next job, what I should be doing. If you asked him, he'd probably think that I'm able to take over the world. And so he's constantly pushing me to be my best self. And so I've enjoyed that support, and I do thank God for that support. I do also have a brother. We actually have a 10-year gap. Right now, in terms of siblings, I only have 1 brother, so we're 2 in our family. And my younger brother, Mike, is also quite supportive, and he's a best friend. You wouldn't imagine that we have a 10-year gap between us. And it's interesting, every time after I give a press briefing, he calls me and we go through it, and you know, he asks me questions, and you know, and he gives me all these tips and advice. Next time, emphasize on this point. You know, next time, you know, call out Kenyans for doing this. You know, next time, emphasize this. Next time, don't say that. And so it's interesting, the relationship we have with him. He's a photographer, and he's very talented. Yeah. Yeah.
So to that question, you're married to your work. Is there an actual human being you're married to?
Like I said, highly married to my work, but I do have a partner who's very supportive, and again, another cheerleader on my court. Yeah.